Well, we left Jehoshaphat on the battlefield with Ahab. And Ahab lost his life in that battle. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, which I'd like you to turn to, the record tells us that Jehoshaphat was rebuked for his involvement in that alliance. We're not going to consider the rebuke until our next study, God willing. I just want you to understand the point that as he was coming back to Jerusalem, shattered by that experience, having nearly lost his life, and confronted with the prophet, it had a very deep impact on him and a change of behavior. And Ezra is going to actually, as the recorder of Chronicles, make a deliberate link between the effect of that rebuke and the events of chapter 19. But we're going to leave that for our next study. Now, we have a challenge with the chronology. And the challenge of the chronology is that we've got to fit in some incidents in the life of Jehoshaphat which aren't clear until you do a little bit of digging. Let me just illustrate this particular point. See, when you come to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, and you read verse 34, now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of Jehu, the son of Hanani, who is mentioned in the book of the kings of Israel. The record virtually finishes with the life of Jehoshaphat. But verse 35 says, after this. So the king's dead and buried, but we have in the record after this. And it's obvious that we are talking thematic linkings. If we come back to 2 Chronicles chapter 20 verse 1, it came to pass after this also. So you see the normal chronology of Chronicles is now being just changed, that we can understand that there are some links within the record itself. You may be interested to know that chronology is a bit of a difficult subject. And I found 3 books very useful, just for those who want to take a few notes. The first, of course, is Brother Thomas's Chronicon Hebraicon. It's a groundbreaking book, well researched, as Brother Thomas was wont to do. And that book, if you're interested in chronology, not everyone's interested in chronology, but it certainly unties a few of the very knotty problems in the chronological sequence of Scripture. From the perspective of the world, there was a book recently put out by Edwin Teeley, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. And this was also a groundbreaking work in relation to the unusual chronology of kings and monarchs in the kingdom of Judah and Israel. There are a number of holes in that book, a number of things that I don't think quite added up. And I came across this book by Floyd Jones, which called the Chronology of the Old Testament, which I use as a fairly significant reference to the chronology of the Kings. I haven't got the time or the inclination to go into all the details of chronology, but I do find this book quite useful. It's a reference book. One of those books that if you've got insomnia, it's ideal to read a few chapters before you go to bed. It's one of those kind of books. But it is a good reference material. It certainly works well from that perspective. So if you ever come across those books, certainly worthwhile getting hold of that. Now, let's look at the chronology. Here we come to the events happening in Ahab's life. Now, we left the battle of 2 Chronicles 18, the death of Ahab, here about the 18th year of King Jehoshaphat. So Ahab's reign is now coming to an end. And as you can see, the succeeding kings who followed Ahab were Ahaziah and Jehoram. And these 2 kings now also interact into the events of Jehoshaphat's life. We have to fit in a number of events. For example, the last event recorded in Chronicles in relation to Jehoshaphat's life, the ships, occur in the reign of Ahaziah. Remember, that was after this, and then we got this event tacked on. Then we have to have this record that we read this morning in 2 Kings chapter 3, which is this campaign with Jehoram. So Jehoram here interacts somehow with Jehoshaphat's life here. And then we have to fit in the events of 2 Chronicles 19, which is tomorrow's session, where the judges go forth And the final event that we have to fit in is the last final international invasion in Jehoshaphat's life. I think that's a reasonable sequence of events, looking at the complexities of the chronology, and it seems to be the best fit. The reason why we've put chapter 20, the international invasion, at the end is because 2 Chronicles 20 says after that invasion, and there was no more war. So clearly that was the final campaign, the final incident in Jehoshaphat's life. And it's a great way, in fact, to finish off this study, because that last study is a very positive and powerful study in relation to the faith and deeds of Jehoshaphat. Now, what is interesting is this, is that Jehoshaphat comes out of the battle in 2 Chronicles 18. He is rebuked by the prophet, but there are still two incidents in which he is involved with Israel. This event here, the ships with Ahaziah, and this campaign that we read this morning in 2 Kings chapter 3. So whilst the rebuke was a significant turning point, there were two other incidents that God was using to get the message through. As far as Ezra is concerned, he put 2 Chronicles 19, the rebuke, and the judges going forth as cause and effect, and we'll discuss that a bit more tomorrow. But you see, it's not quite straightforward, is it? The rebuke comes, but he's still entangled with the north. And you ask yourself the question, well, hasn't he learnt the lessons? But you know, we're no different, are we? We can be very obtuse at times. And we can face trial after trial after trial until finally we get the message. So we're in no position really to look down our noses at Jehoshaphat. It did take a while for these incidents to have an effect. And we're no different. I mean, have you ever come across situations in life where it's like deja vu? You know, I've been here before. I've faced these kind of conflicts and difficulties before. And because we didn't learn the lesson in the first instance, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, God simply just changes slightly the parameters until finally we get the message. It's the same with Jehoshaphat. Now let's look at the incident of the ships. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 35. And after this did Jehoshaphat king of Judah join himself with Ahaziah king of Israel, who did very wickedly. And he joined himself with him to make ships to go to Tarshish, and they made the ships into Zion-Geber. Then Eliezer, the son of Dodavar of Marashah, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, because thou hast joined thyself with Ahaziah, Yahweh hath broken thy works. And the ships were broken, and they were not able to go to Tarshish. Now I want you to notice several things. Join himself. 3 times in that record. And the word means to join, and it also means to fascinate. Jehoshaphat is fascinated with this lifestyle over the border. I mean, he's connected by marriage, so he's locked into this. But there is something about the lifestyle in the north that is almost bewitching in some ways. I mean, he didn't like that lifestyle, he had nothing to do with that lifestyle, but looking across the border, it was just a little bit fascinating. You know, the world's a bit like that at times, isn't it? You know, we have a boundary in our life, we don't want to go past that boundary, but we're fascinated by that. It just takes our attention. Well, it shouldn't. And 3 times in the record, the point was made he joined himself. Now, this trade route to the eastern Tarshish was like a gold mine. It was a trade route to untold wealth. In the days of Solomon, it was a 3-year voyage. The gold of Ophir is one of those mystical, mysterious places that commentators have all sorts of views on. It could have been possibly in the region of India, could have been down the coast of South Africa. We're not quite sure. But it was the trade route to untold riches. And you needed wealth to keep an economy going. But he joined himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel. And the record says Ahaziah did very wickedly. And we have once more this king caught in this relationship. Good and evil together. These ships of Tarshish were high-tech vessels. They were designed for ocean-going voyages. The ships in the Mediterranean were altogether different from the ships in the open ocean. You needed different vessels for different oceans. These were high-tech ships of the day. The skilled mariners of Lebanon were the only people who really could impart that information across the world. But in verse 37, Eliezer, the son of Dodavah. Eliezer means God is help. Shouldest thou help the ungodly? Said 2 Chronicles 19. And God now confronts Jehoshaphat with a prophet whose name means God is help. You can't put your help in people like Ahaziah. You can't put your trust in people like Ahab. God is help. Got the message, Jehoshaphat? I am the one who can give you the help. Not joining affinity with business deals with this kind of wickedness. And he is the son of Dodavah, which means beloved of God. And this man comes from all places of Marashah. Now we saw in our opening study that it was at Marashah where the 1 million Ethiopians were defeated on the field of battle because of the faith of his father Asa. So there's a very pointed connection here, isn't there? I'm the one who can help you. And I'm sending a prophet from a place where faith defeated evil. And so God broke those ships. Now, I don't know whether you've ever been in business. Or you may have had investments. And you've got a lot of money, a lot of time. And the market goes south. Or the business deal collapses and you lose a lot of money. This is losing an enormous amount of investment and money. It is shattering. The psalmist says that he sent an east wind and destroyed the ships of Tarshish. And I believe that psalm actually is contextually within the time of Jehoshaphat. You imagine waking up once morning, there's a gale blowing which turns into a cyclone. And in the end, all of your investment's gone. All of it's gone. The record says that the ships were broken. Yahweh hath broken thy works. He will not prosper our alliance with evil. So Jehoshaphat's being taught that you can't influence wicked people by marrying. And you certainly can't influence them by business deals and business partnerships. Stay right clear of those things. His works were broken. When we come to 2 Kings chapter 3, there's a final lesson that Jehoshaphat has to learn. And sometimes we've got to go through a lot of pain before we actually get the message. You know, isn't this true to life? Isn't this true to life? As far as Ezra is concerned, he's not interested in the events of 2 Kings chapter 3. It's not part of his thematic consideration, nor is it part of his story in relation to Jehoshaphat. But it is an incident that we need to bring into the picture to understand the fullness of what God is doing here. Verse 1 of chapter 3, Now Jehoram, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel and Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. So Ahab's dead. He died on the battlefield with an arrow in his chest. And his son Jehoram now takes the throne. Now Jehoram's a bit of a mixed bag. He forsakes the family religion, Baal worship, but he goes back to the pioneers, and his pioneer was Jeroboam, who made Israel to sin. He forsakes Baal, but doesn't get rid of the idols of Baal. On one occasion, he feels like killing Elisha. On another occasion, he listens to his advice about wars with Syria. He's a king that does wickedly, yet he was the king that restored the inheritance to the Shunammite woman. He's very much a mixed bag. Not a straightforward person at all. This mixture of of listening to Elisha but wanting next thing to kill him, of restoring people's inheritance but yet at the same time doing wickedly. Very much a complex character. A different person to his father Ahab, who sold himself to sin. In verse 2, he wrought evil in the sight of Yahweh, but not like his father and not like his mother. Nevertheless, in verse 3, he cleaved to the sins of Jeroboam. Now, the background is that on the death of Ahab, Mesha, who is a Moabite across the border there, who was tributary to Israel, cast off the yoke. That was a great financial loss. Verse 4 tells us that the tribute was 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with the wool. I don't know whether you can contemplate the numbers of those kind of animals every year coming across the border into your economy with the wool. It is an enormous amount, and that's now cut off. Gone. Well, that's going to hit the hip pocket. And so in verse 5, it came to pass when Ahab was dead and the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel, and King Joram went out of Samaria at the same time and numbered all Israel. And in verse 7, he went and sent to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Now, what is different in this incident to that which happened with 2 Chronicles 18, the battle with Ahab, is interesting. Jehoshaphat is not in Samaria. Jehoshaphat has not got his throne beside the gate of Samaria. Remember the point we made yesterday about the wide gate, the broad way leading to destruction? Jehoshaphat is no longer involved in making trips to Samaria. There's one difference. He's in Jerusalem. And the second difference is that the request comes from the north to the south. The king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab to battle? There's no attempt to manipulate like Ahab did. There's no attempt to impress. There's no attempt to try and do what Ahab did. It's a request. And Jehoshaphat, sitting in Jerusalem, not under the pressure of this man Ahab, is now able to think about this request. The king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You've been rebuked by the prophet. Your business investments have been smashed to pieces. You've lost a lot of money. And the prophet has also told you, you don't join affinity. What are you going to do? Well, he's trapped, isn't he? His son is married into this dynasty. We are not told any motive. We are not told any reason of the decision he made. He simply, in verse 7, said, I will go up. I am as thou art, my people as thy people. If you've got a marginal reference, you'll see that it doesn't refer to Chronicles, but it is the exact phraseology that he used in 2 Chronicles 18. What is he doing? I mean, surely alarm bells would have been ringing in his mind. Surely. Hasn't he got the message yet? Doesn't he understand? Or does he feel, brothers and sisters, that in this cycle of marriage alliance, he has responsibilities, opportunities to try and help his family? I think that's probably, in the end, what it came down to. But we're not told. And so God has almost to use this final incident to try and hammer home the message that he should have nothing at all to do with the north. And we're going to find, in fact, that as we go through this chapter, Jehoshaphat in the end gets it. He gets it in the end. But imagine saying those words, "I am as thou art." Those are precisely the same words he said just a few years previously to Ahab. Now, the difference with this record, and I think this puts a little bit of a different perspective about this record, is that when the approach was made for the invasion to occur, Jehoram has in his mind that Yahweh is behind this invasion. Look at verse 10. The king of Israel said, "Alas, that Yahweh hath called these three things together." Verse 13, halfway through the verse, the king of Israel said, "No, for Yahweh hath called these three kings together." Now this to me, this took ages to try and think this one through. I'm not even sure I really have the full story of this. But here is the complexity of this. We've got a king of Israel on the throne, who, although he's forsaken Baal, has embraced the calves of Jeroboam. And yet he is absolutely convinced on twice in this record, verse 10 and verse 13, that Yahweh has endorsed the invasion somehow. Now, for this king, who doesn't even believe in Yahweh, to invoke God's name as an endorsement of this invasion implies to me that there's another dimension behind this chapter. And it may have been, either through prophetic affirmation or some other providential point, that Jehoshaphat went into battle because God had endorsed this campaign. And that may have actually been the explanation as to why Jehoshaphat agreed to go into battle. Now, it's just a hint, it's an inference, but there is something unusual about this record. You don't have an atheistic king of Israel on two occasions affirming that God somehow has brought these kings to battle unless there is something else behind the scene in which this battle has been affirmed. In fact, the way Jehoshaphat is rebuked is a mild rebuke, as we shall see, compared to what had happened in the previous two occasions. So don't write Jehoshaphat off. Don't assume that he's making a stupid mistake again, that there is something else in this record that is pushing him into the battle. But he still made a mistake. When we come back to verse 8, the king of Israel defers to the king of Judah. He, that is, the king of Israel, said, "Which way shall we go up?" So let's talk morality here now. The parable behind the incident. Warfare in Scripture is used by Paul in the New Testament to represent the conflict that we have against sin. And this battle is between Judah and Edom. And Edom stands in the record as a symbol of everything that's hate about Israel. They hate Israel. You know, I could never understand how you could have a perpetual hatred for Israel in Edom until people like Hamas and Hezbollah burst upon the scene. And then you understand how this perpetual hatred of Israel can be perpetuated through generation after generation after generation. And that's Edom. And so, when you want to go to battle against evil, you need to take a way and a strategy. So when verse 8, the king of Israel said, "Which way shall we go up?" And the answer came back, "Through the wilderness of Edom." You can't fight the warfare of faith by adopting the way of Edom. The way of Edom is entirely different to the ways of God. The way of Edom is hatred, animosity, enmity, contention, arrogance, and pride. You cannot fight the battles of God going that way. Through the way of Edom. Here's the way of Edom. Israel came down north, joined to Jerusalem. The troops came down south, and this was the way of Edom through here. That's the geographics of the battle. But the morality of the battle is you can't fight the wars of God using the way of Edom. Mistake number one. So verse 9, the king of Israel went, and the king of Judah and the king of Edom. Israel, Judah, and Edom. Sorry, the battle's against Moab. I think I said Edom before. It's against Moab. Now, this alliance is getting worse. At the time of the battle, Edom, in fact, was a tributary of Judah. Judah was controlling Edom. So now we've got Israel, now we've got Edom, and now we've got Judah in a threefold alliance. It's getting worse. And the record says in verse 9 that they fetched a compass of 7 days' journey, and there was no water for the host and for the cattle that followed them. They fetched a compass. The Hebrew word means to go in a circle. They were going round in circles. Because that's exactly where they were going spiritually. Just round in circles. When you ally yourself with Israel and you ally yourself with Edom, you're going to go around in circles. You're not going to get any headway. You're not going to reach a destination, and the battle will stall. Because you're in alliance with people who are evil. And they were going round in circles for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 7 days they went round in a circle. 7, the number of the covenant. Going around in circles for 7 days is an obvious contrast to the faithfulness of Israel in the times of Joshua, when they encircled Jericho 7 days. And they defeated that city by faith. This is an absolute contrast here. And there was no water. You can't find the water of life if you're with Edom and Israel and you're going around in circles. And the cattle's with them. Why should the record tell us about the cattle? The cattle followed them. Literally, the cattle was at their feet. Why does the record introduce the animals at their feet? Well, man was to have dominion over all things. All things were to be placed under his feet, including oxen and sheep and cattle. And the oxen under the feet was a symbol of having dominion over carnal thinking, fleshly thinking. And the animals were not in their dominion. They were in the same sorry state as this army. Now you imagine this army bristling with weapons, fierce warriors, and they're lost, going round in circles in a desert with no water for 7 days. And this adversity is about to expose the hearts of 3 kings. We're going to get 3 different reactions from 3 different kings. Notice in verse 9, the king of Israel, the king of Judah, the king of Edom. They're not named. No distinction is made. They're all classified as the same. King, king, king. The record is lumping Jehoshaphat together on an equal spiritual level with the kings of Israel and of Edom. That's going to change in a moment. But as they set on that journey, allied together, they're all lumped together. No distinction. You couldn't distinguish between a king of Judah and a king of Edom. You couldn't distinguish between a king of Judah and a king of Israel. They're all the same. In verse 10, the king of Israel said, "Alas." So the hearts of these 3 kings are about to be exposed. The king of Edom makes no comment in this whole record. Jehoram cries out in despair, and it's Jehoshaphat that cries out to seek God. It's interesting, isn't it, how adversity exposes the hearts of people, and we get the real people now coming forth. Alas, that Yahweh hath called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. As I mentioned before, he attributes the whole providential circumstance to God himself. But now he's firmly convinced not only that God is involved in this, but that God has brought them to this position where they're going to be defeated. So what's Jehoshaphat going to do? And notice now he's named. Before it was king, 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 and now it's Jehoshaphat. Because now this king is going to rise above this situation. Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not a prophet of Yahweh, that we may inquire of Yahweh by him?" The same words he spoke in 2 Chronicles 18 verse 6. And I can imagine Jehoshaphat's heart just stopping in his tracks, as I think it probably dawned on him that he's been in exactly the same situation a number of years before, facing death, facing a decision, and asking for a prophet of God. Now think about this, brothers and sisters. He didn't bring a prophet with him. I mean, he's here in the middle of battle, wandering around a desert for 7 days, and he asks this question: is there here a prophet of Yahweh? Now that is a sentence born of desperation. He didn't bring anybody with him. So how reasonable is that request? But you know, brothers and sisters, there was a prophet. And I think Jehoshaphat, when he said that, would have understood that he's in desperate circumstances. He has no prophet. And the answer comes not from his own court, but from the court of the king of Israel. One of the servants of the king of Israel answered. Now, how astounding is this? There was somebody in the court of Israel, like an Obadiah in the days of Ahab. He's an unknown individual, obscured by the record. And it would be the last place that you'd have sought some response to that question. You'd have thought the answer would have come from Judah's court. You'd have thought the answer would have come from some faithful individual there who would have said, "I know somebody." But you see, the problem was that they didn't know anybody because he hadn't brought a prophet with him. And all this would have been playing on Jehoshaphat's mind. He's in deep trouble. Now look at the answer of this individual in verse 11. One of the king of Israel's servants answered and said, "Here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah." This is astounding. This servant in the court of Israel knows of Elisha, knows he's a prophet of God, and knows he's in the vicinity. Elisha, God is salvation. We're talking about saving these kings. And he happens to have almost the same name as Jehoshaphat. Elisha, the son of Shaphat. And Jehoshaphat is going to get a judgment which I think at last turns him, and at last the impression gets through. Now, what is Elisha doing in the vicinity, in the middle of a desert, miles away from home, keeping track of these kings going around in circles for 7 days. Just think about the providence of all of this. He's only just been anointed to take over Elijah's place. He went from Jordan to Carmel to Samaria, and now here he's in the deserts of Edom. I think this is one of the most gracious things of God. Come to Isaiah 65. It illustrates this principle. You know, it leaves you breathless, for instance, when you contemplate the way God reacts to his people, even in their folly. It's talking about the future age in Isaiah 65, but it illustrates the point I want to make this morning. In verse 24, it shall come to pass that before Israel calls, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear. And that principle expressed in the future age of Israel is seen here. It is absolutely astounding that despite the rashness of Jehoshaphat's alliance, despite the fact that he made this alliance with Edom as well, that God in his providence had anticipated all of this and had put Elisha in that area in anticipation of Jehoshaphat's need. I'm just overwhelmed by that. Absolutely overwhelmed. And I think in the end that's the turning point, because when we come back to 2 Kings chapter 3, look at Jehoshaphat's reaction. Verse 12, Jehoshaphat said, the word of Yahweh is with him. Now when Micaiah was dragged before Jehoshaphat and Ahab, and Micaiah made that tremendous prophecy, in the end Jehoshaphat didn't listen to that. In the end, Jehoshaphat went into battle, nearly lost his life, and was only delivered by the goodness of God. But here it is different. This man is a prophet, and his word is the word of God, and the implication behind that is, I'm going to listen this time. There's a readiness to listen. There's a readiness to listen even by the king of Israel. That's why it's an astounding record when you think about it. That there's an underlying information here that allows us to see this as a different circumstance to what happened previously. Not that it excuses the alliance, but the effects are different. The people are different slightly. So, Elisha appears out of nowhere in the middle of a desert after 7 days, just there. And his first words, Elisha said to the king of Israel, the first words are not to Jehoshaphat, they're to Jehoram. And it's not, "G'day, how you going? What have I to do with thee?" Now these are Elisha's opening words of greeting. And it's a Hebraism. What do we have in common? And the obvious implication is absolutely nothing. And Jehoshaphat's listening to this. What am I to do with thee? Go, get thee to the prophets of thy father and the prophets of thy mother. But the king of Israel responds and says, "No, for Yahweh hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab." You know, Joram could have easily have taken offense. Joram could have easily have said, "Well, I will go back to my father's idols." But he is absolutely stubbornly persistent that somehow God has endorsed this invasion. So Elisha says in verse 14, "As Yahweh of hosts liveth, before whom I stand." Where have you heard those words before? They're the very words that Elijah used when he first met Jehoram's father Ahab, as Yahweh of hosts liveth, before whom I stand. He is saying to this community of kings, I am taking over where Elijah left off. I am in the spirit and power of Elijah. And he's still addressing the king of Israel. It's almost like Jehoshaphat's a bystander listening to this. Elisha has not spoken yet to Jehoshaphat. As Yahweh of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the face, the presence of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would not look toward thee nor see thee. Elisha continues with the indictment. I'm not even seeing you. I don't even recognize you. I'm not even going to talk to you. And it's only because of the face of Jehoshaphat that I'm prepared to even help you. You see, it was a mild rebuke. As Jehoshaphat's listening to this conversation, he is a bystander in the conversation. And you can imagine him listening to this conversation, listening to this interchange. And it's saying that in all of this folly, in all of this decision that I've made, says Jehoshaphat, thinking in his mind, God respects my face. He regards me, but he does not regard the face of evil. Now, I'm emphasizing this word face because we're going to see this occur in our next study tomorrow, God willing. Face. And whilst it was a rebuke, it was also an encouragement. It was Elisha saying that God does respect and listen to Jehoshaphat, even in these circumstances. You've no business being here, Jehoshaphat. And Elisha's still not talking to Jehoshaphat. You've no business being in this alliance. But at least God's prepared to listen to you, Jehoshaphat, and not to Jehoram. Now, Elisha could have just left it there. He could have just made the rebuke and gone. But in verse 15, Elisha, whose name means God is salvation, is different to Elijah. Elijah pronounced famine and disappeared from the scene for 3.5 years. Elisha works with these kings. Bring me a minstrel, says verse 15. And it came to pass when the minstrel played that the hand of Yahweh came upon him. It wasn't an unusual way of receiving prophetic instruction, but it wasn't common. Do you normally bring musicians to battle? But there was a minstrel there. And why did Elisha adopt that method of prophecy? Why didn't he just say, thus saith Yahweh of hosts? Well, you see, music calms. We've got some agitated kings here. The king of Edom doesn't say a word. This is probably above him, beyond him. The king of Israel is agitated. And so Elisha brings this musician who soothes, calms the scene, and puts them in the right frame of mind to listen to the message. In verse 16, he said, thus saith Yahweh, make this valley full of ditches. Man was being asked to cooperate and to express their faith in cooperation with God. You know, we could have dispensed with the ditches. Moab could have been defeated by plague. Moab could be defeated by many, many different ways. But that wasn't the way in which God asked these kings to react. He's asking them to build ditches. You've got to go out and dig. You're in a desert. You're in the boiling sun. You haven't had water for 7 days. And the prophet's now asking you to go and dig some ditches. If you don't dig the ditches, you don't put the effort in, and you don't respond in obedience to the word what I'm saying you, there will be no victory. You see, we reap what we sow. For thus saith Yahweh in verse 17, you shall not see wind, neither shall ye see rain, yet the valley shall be filled with water, that ye may drink, both ye and your cattle and your beasts. Now, where have you come across this language before? There's no wind. There's no rain. When Elijah was on the sides of Sinai, and a wind came tearing through the mountain, the point was made, God is not in the whirlwind, but it's the still, small voice. And it was Elijah the prophet that went to Israel and said that there will be neither rain for 3.5 years. This is linking back to the work of Elijah. And what it's doing is attempting to get through to the king of Israel. Jehoshaphat doesn't need to be encouraged. Jehoshaphat believes the prophet. But Elisha is trying to get through to this king of Israel. You've been in a position where you've seen no rain. And the water of life is about to fill this valley, that you may drink, you and your cattle. There will be life as a result of my word. And you know, brothers and sisters, that Elisha, who had approached Jehoram saying, what have we got in common? After this incident, actually resides in Samaria and works with this king. And the reason for that is that Jehoram went out and dug the ditches. He responded to Elisha's message. If he was that bad, he would have said, well, who do you think you are asking me to go out and dig holes in the ground? But he didn't. And this incident seems to be a changing point in the relationship between the prophets of God and the kings of Israel. In verse 18, this is but a light thing in the sight of Yahweh, and he will deliver the Moabites also into your hand. The emphasis was on saving them by water. It was incidental that he gave the victory over Moab. Incidental. The first point of emphasis was to save these people by water. That's the work of Elisha. So in verse 20, it came to pass in the morning, when the meal offering was offered, that behold, there came water by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. Why is the record telling us that it coincided with the meal offering? And why was deliverance by the flooding of water? When was the last time Israel was flooded with water? Well, it was on Mount Carmel. When Elijah got the barrels of water in a drought and saturated that altar. The place was filled with water, and God used exactly the same method, exactly the same way, a place filled with water to teach Israel that we want to save you, not destroy you. The meal offering. It didn't say when the offering was given to the calves of Samaria. It didn't say when the offerings were made to Edom's god, Chemosh and Molech. It was directing the attention of all of these kings to the sacrifices and offerings in Jerusalem. That's where the truth was. The assurance of victory is deliberately linked with the meal offering. Now, when you go back to the law, let's come back to Exodus 29. We find in verse 39 of Exodus 29, that the meal offering was just incidental to a larger offering. Exodus 29, verse 39. Verse 38 for context. Now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continually. The one lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and the other lamb thou shalt offer in the even. And with the one lamb, a 10th deal of flour mingled with the 4th part of an hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of an hin of wine for a drink offering. And the other lamb thou shalt offer at even, and shalt do thereto according to the meal offering of the morning, and according to the drink offering thereof for a sweet savour, an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations, at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before Yahweh, where I will meet you to speak there unto you. Now, the intriguing thing is that the meal offering in 2 Kings chapter 3 is just an incidental part of the daily burnt offering. Now, you've got to ask yourself the question, why didn't 2 Kings chapter 3 say, when the burnt offering was given? I mean, that would have been the obvious thing, because that was the key offering. And the meal offering was just incidental to that burnt offering. Why? I've got no idea. That's not true. I do have an idea. What did the meal offering represent? The meal offering was a cereal offering, and the cereal offering which came from the ground always represented the fruits of one's labours. The burnt offering represented complete dedication, and that would have been a good lesson to make. But back in 2 Kings chapter 3, it's the fruit of one's labours. It's the fruit, it's the works, it's the effects of your behaviour. Jehoshaphat, are you getting this? Are you getting this, Jehoshaphat? That the effects of what you have done is like the cereal offering on the burnt offering. And what I want in that offering, with the frankincense of prayer and the labour of your hands mingled together, it's that offering I want you to think about, Jehoshaphat. The effects of your behaviour, the works of your hands. And that's why it's mentioned. Because in all of this, God is asking Jehoshaphat to look at the consequences of his behaviour. And when that meal offering was offered, it would have been miles away in Jerusalem, but it was in Jerusalem, not Samaria, and not in Edom, but in Jerusalem. That's where true worship was. And when that offering was made first thing in the morning, or last thing in the evening, then the water came. And the fact that the connection is made is obviously that Jehoshaphat was thinking about this. That he knew that this was the time of the burnt offering and the meal offering. And when that offering came, Jehoshaphat was conscious of that, and the water floods through. And incidentally, I will give you the Moabites into your hand. But that's just incidental. I'm saving you. Now that incident, I think, was the turning point. Elisha had been addressing the king of Israel. Jehoshaphat's on the sidelines, but he's listening to this. He's rebuked. I've got nothing to do with you. But at the same time, he's encouraged. God regards my face. And I think the overwhelming sense of this rebuke combined with this assurance that God was still with Jehoshaphat was enough, in fact, to make the change. Ezra doesn't record this. It's not part of his thematic linking, but it is part of the drama of this king's life. The astounding thing is, brothers and sisters, that even though this was the 3rd time, God was still prepared to work with this king. I find that the wonderful lesson of this chapter. That sometimes we can become very discouraged in our weaknesses, very depressed by our inefficiencies and insufficiencies and our transgressions and our sins. And we can feel ourselves almost isolated from our God. And this chapter is assuring us that God will continue to work with us. It is the lesson of our first study. God is with us as long as we are with him. He will be found of us if we seek him. And even though we are weak, and even though we fail, and even though we do sin, we have this tremendous assurance that if we can hang on to the things of God, if we can be persistent in our prayers, it doesn't matter whether we make foolish mistakes or not, if we seek God and seek his mercy and seek his goodness, he is still prepared to work with us. He may bring us very low. He may bring us exceedingly low, but he will continue to work with us. And we're in no position to stand back and say to Jehoshaphat, why didn't you get the lesson the first time? Because we are precisely the same, if not worse. As God is trying to teach us time and time and time again to dissociate from the evil, to change our ways, to reform ourselves before our Lord returns. And this last incident, wandering around in the desert, and all of a sudden Elisha happens to be there, is a tremendous lesson, a tremendously encouraging lesson, that God will answer before we ask, that he can anticipate our needs. He will rebuke us, he will guide us, he will challenge us, but he will anticipate our needs. I will be with you as long as you're with me.
On all our behalfs, Brother Carl, I'd like to thank you for a very powerful class.